Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom, and we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. And I'm so glad that you've joined us this morning because we have a lot to cover and a lot to catch up on. And we have Good Friday off here at Big Fox. So you got to get your comments in today because you're going to have to wait 3 days before you can comment again. All right, some comments from viewers after yesterday's program, and this is from Rick. Rick writes, after yesterday's show, Frank, I agree with your response about my comments on ground rules at the town halls. And this, if you didn't join us yesterday, Rick had suggested that the officials holding town halls should have ground rules. My thought on it was the ground rules would not be followed. And he said they won't work, but it's too bad they won't. People don't have that much self-control right now given the state of events. They won't work. I agree with you. I agree with myself, agreeing with you. But it is too bad that you can't hold good faith town halls, have the conversation with your representatives. I don't think that saying that the people that are protesting in the town halls because of the quote-unquote state of events is justification for the way that they behave. I think that's not a fair excuse, but I'll continue. Your comment on Representative Langworthy not sitting on his hands and agreeing with Trump's agenda. Well, if he agrees with Trump, then he doesn't represent me or plot of the people in this part of the state, or a lot. I'm sorry, I think that was an autocorrect. A lot of people in this state, this part of the state. People are mad at all the misdirected goings on of the last 100 days. In the words of the Donald, nobody has ever seen anything like it. Well, I would argue, and just be fair, Rick, you've watched the program. I do this with other comments, like Ken's as well, kind of intersect my comments with your comments. I understand that he may not represent the opinions of some people in this district, but he did win in a pretty overwhelming fashion, running on an agenda that supported Trump's agenda. So I understand that there are people that disagree with the congressman. That's natural. That happens with any congressman or congressperson. But again, to my point, I don't think Congressman Langworthy has in any way hidden his support of Trump's agenda. But continuing, I just saw the Marjorie Taylor Greene town hall disaster on TV. Well, all I can say is some of the participants act just like she does. And he continued later on in the afternoon saying, well, how did Donald do today? Slow growth, higher inflation from Fed chair. As a result, the stock market tanks again. Glad I took my draw before Trump was sworn in. Judge contemplating whether to levy contempt charges against Trump officials. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. For the Garcia debacle and the plane loads of others shipped to El Salvador. Ship full of wheat headed to Yemen to help feed 17 million hungry people. Unfortunately, no one from USAID will be there to make sure it gets distributed. Geez, you'd think someone stopped funding for USAID. Now Harvard. While students treat others like you want to be treated or get lost. Half of you are there on daddy's dime anyway. Keep the grant money for research that can help millions instead of sheltering a few who don't care that can spell a financial disaster for the university. Donald would love to take all your federal funding away. Donald is a great guy and had a great day. Thank you, Rick. All right. Yes, we are going to talk about Harvard. We are going to talk about Garcia, extensively on Garcia. First, breaking story from last night. A third top Pentagon official has been put on leave amid an investigation into leaks at the Department of Defense. The latest official potentially implicated in the probe is Colin Carroll, the chief of staff to Deputy Defense Secretary Stephen Feinberg. Carroll's suspension follows the removal of, as we mentioned yesterday on the program, Dan Caldwell, a senior advisor to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Darren Seltnick, the Pentagon chief's deputy chief of staff, from their posts. This happening on Tuesday. A defense official told the New York Post, we can confirm that Mr. Carroll, Mr. Caldwell, and Mr. Seltnick have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Caldwell was put on administrative leave for an unauthorized disclosure, according to a Pentagon official. Seltnick has been under investigation in the same leak probe that implicated Caldwell. According to reports, both men were escorted out of the Pentagon by security. The defense official said yesterday that they would not say whether Carroll's suspension was related to the leak probe. Now, this is, I think, sending a signal. We talked about it yesterday, sending a signal, no pun intended, that the administration is not going to put up with these unauthorized leaks that happen so frequently in the first Trump term. I'm not sure. The media does not seem to be latching on to the fact yet, or attacking, I should say, P. Hegseth specifically, though that has been a common refrain since his time in the Department of Defense. But that's just an update that we are now at 3 people suspended, though the most recent suspension not necessarily due, that we know of yet, to the original leak probe. Okay, so to that viewer's point, Rick, who wrote in yesterday, federal judge James Boasberg is back in the news. He finds probable cause to hold Trump in contempt over the deportation flights. I do, and I would love to hear your opinion. I find it interesting whether it's Chris Van Hollen, who is visiting, we're going to talk about that in a moment, El Salvador, and these people kind of grandstanding on Garcia's name. When you learn more about Garcia and you learn more about his past, I find it a hard argument to make. Is that landing with the American people, saying, wow, look, our representative is really doing their job and fighting to make sure that these illegal immigrants come back to the United States? Same with Boasberg here. Are people in support overall? I mean, there obviously are. I mean, you see signs, you see at these protests, people want Garcia, and you can't really say back home, and that's what the White House's response was. It's not back home. He is home in El Salvador. I don't know. This just seems like 2 examples of what cost Democrats the election in November, 2 of what is many, but lawfare, or using the judicial system against Trump, and support of this illegal immigration. But I'll continue. Boasberg said Wednesday that he has found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in contempt for failing to return 2 planes deporting migrants to El Salvador last month. In a 48-page order, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg said that the court had determined that the Trump... sorry. It's that time of year, folks. Said that the court had determined that the Trump administration had demonstrated a willful disregard for his March 15th emergency order, which temporarily halted all deportation flights to El Salvador under the Aliens Enemy Act. Boasberg had also ordered all planes bound for El Salvador to be immediately returned to U.S. soil, which did not happen. Hundreds of migrants arrived in El Salvador later that evening, where the individuals were detained in a sprawling, maximum security Salvadorian prison. Boasberg said yesterday, the court ultimately determines that the government's actions on that day demonstrate a willful disregard for its order, sufficient for the court to conclude that probable cause exists to find the government in criminal contempt. Again, this kind of weaponization of the judicial system did not play out well in November, but there does seem to be some judges that did not learn their lesson. I mean, he's not the only one. We had that judge who blocked Trump from freezing money to the EPA and energy funds, Judge Mary McElroy, who has twice blocked President Donald Trump's efforts to freeze EPA, Energy Department, and other grants. She has a history of being a Democrat activist. So just like we talked about, and we're going to talk about more extensively on today's program, Letitia James, I think, again, not having learned the lessons from November, this kind of activism and this kind of lawfare did not play well with the American people. But U.S. District Judge Mary McElroy issued an injunction against the Trump administration, ruling in favor of environmental groups who claim the president unlawfully froze grants for projects that combat alleged, quote, climate change, reduce pollution, and modernize American infrastructure. But if you look at her past, very much a Democrat activist, As a high school student, she handed out flyers for Julius V. Michelson's Senate campaign in 1982. In 1984, in college, she acted as a page for the Rhode Island delegation to the Democratic National Convention. She served as a volunteer for James E. O'Neill's campaign for Rhode Island Attorney General, and she was a member of the Rhode Island Democrats from 1984 to 1986. But anyway, going back to Boasberg. Boasberg instructed the government to file additional declarations by April the 23rd, demonstrating why the court should purge any contempt proceedings against it. Should they fail to do so, he said, the court will refer the matter for potential prosecution. That would involve identifying the individuals responsible for what the judge describes, well, I don't even know how to say some of these legalese words, so I'm not even going to try, determining whose specific act or omission caused the noncompliance. The Justice Department could then request that the contempt be prosecuted by an attorney for the government, and should they decline to prosecute the matter, could appoint another attorney to prosecute the contempt. Boasberg continued, the court does not reach such conclusions lightly or hastily. Boy, that that sounds familiar. How many times did we hear that during the 4 years where Trump was out of office? How many times? We do not reach this decision lightly. That was always the comments made by the judges that people had accused of lawfare. So it's a little reminiscent of that. Indeed, it has given defendants ample opportunity to rectify or explain their actions, noting that none of their responses have been satisfactory to the court. I think it goes without saying the Trump administration wasted very little time responding to Judge Boasberg. We plan to seek immediate appellate relief. The president is 100% committed to ensuring that terrorists and criminal illegal migrants are no longer a threat to Americans and their communities across the country. Now, this order is the latest development in the ongoing feud between Trump officials and Boasberg, who drew the administration's ire last month after temporarily blocking the deportation of certain migrants to El Salvador. Last month, Boasberg granted a temporary restraining order for 14 days to allow the court to review Trump's use of the Alien Enemies Act to immediately deport certain individuals. Boasberg also issued a bench ruling ordering that all migrant flights be immediately returned to U.S. soil. The administration did not comply, and hours later, the planes arrived in El Salvador. Now, I'd like to, and I should really print out the quote here, what Marco Rubio had to say at the Oval Office meeting with El Salvadorian president, saying that the president of the United States, and I'm paraphrasing, the president of the United States is the only one that sets foreign policy, not the court. Now, Boasberg has scolded the Trump administration, as we've talked about in the past. So again, Judge Boasberg to launch contempt proceedings into Trump's administration. We're going to talk about this Garcia case. I know it is the biggest story, arguably, in the news right now for good reason. I do find it interesting how the media and how certain Democrat politicians and judges are trying to downplay the fact of Garcia's past, of the fact that they're fighting, and I think you can make this argument like with Representative Van Hollen, that you are fighting harder for the illegal migrants than you are for your constituents, for your citizens. We're going to talk about that when we come back. We're going to read your comments. I see a lot of waves coming in. Keep in mind, we're not here tomorrow. We've got a evergreen episode, as they're called, a rerun. But I hope that you'll tune in anyway. But if you want to get your comments in, today's the day. Otherwise, you have to wait 3 long days to get your comments in. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Mark writes in, good morning, Frank. Well, good morning, Mark. Booker is going to El Salvador to make a statement. Let's see if he can bring that illegal back. Yes, Cory Booker was really excited coming off the heels of his 25-hour speech that the media is fawning over. Again, I think it's a very good example of what the Democrat parties the Democrat Party is dealing with right now. A lot of talk, nothing accomplished. at the end of the day. And that's exactly what that 25-hour speech was. And in this case, they are getting on the side of a person, and we're going to talk about it in a moment, that has quite a background, Mr. Garcia. But as I had said, Judge Boasberg is going to launch that contempt proceeding into the Trump administration. That is relatively breaking news. The Constitution does not tolerate willful disobedience of judicial orders, especially by officials of a coordinated branch who have sworn an oath to uphold it. Allowing political leaders to defy court judgments would make a solemn mockery of the Constitution itself. So Boasberg is becoming quickly the face of the resistance, if you will, liking this attention that he's getting, liking this kind of judicial activism, the weaponization of the courts. Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland was on CNN's News Central yesterday, and he said, and I quote, "Judge Boasberg goes to great pains to restate the precedent going back to 1967, Walker versus Birmingham, holding that you've got to comply with a court order, even if you know they were in the wrong court, even if for some reason there's a change. Look, Judge Boasberg, who was a President Bush appointee when he originally went on the bench, and he was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale, will go down in history as a great judicial hero for what he's doing here." Now, before you say, wow, Boasberg was a Bush appointee, think of how often, and it only seems to ever go one way, Republicans nominate a judge, and they seem to fall away from their conservative beliefs very often. Not always, but very often. Does not happen to the Democrats, does not happen. Look at the Supreme Court specifically. So sadly, a lot of Bush appointees heading down that road, but we'll continue. Raskin said he is trying to put on a huge stop sign against the lawlessness. He said, "I issued an injunction for you to not let those planes go, or if they were in the air, to turn them around. They hadn't left yet, but you willfully, deliberately defied a court order. You can't do that. Even the President of the United States can't do that. The executive branch can't do it. The legislative branch can't do it. No citizen can do it. You cannot defy the order of a court." He's saying, "I'm going to give you at least one chance, essentially to purge the contempt to bring the Trump administration in line with the law." So he's giving them one last chance before he makes a final ruling on criminal contempt. If I were them, I would get those people back immediately who were covered by his original injunction. This is a line-by-line, minute-by-minute recitation of the defiance and contempt of the administration. So again, Jamie Raskin, and this is what Judge Boasberg is loving, goes to CNN and says, and I quote, "He will go down in history as a great judicial hero for what he's doing here." Now, keep in mind, and if Judge Boasberg is watching, keep in mind, as soon as you find against a Democrat, or if you're not strong enough against Trump, you will be a pariah. You will be hated by people like Mr. Raskin. Now, as we learn more, and we're going to talk about it when we come back from break, more about Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and the media's kind of been forced to talk about it, and they don't know how to handle it. Because remember, they're making this a kind of a what's the word I want? A case study, not really is the right word, but they want to make this a huge issue. I don't think it resonates with the American people who voted overwhelmingly to take care of our border issue. So when the media is saying this illegal migrant being returned to his home that looks to have had gang ties, now we learn that he beat his wife, and they don't know how to cover this. This is now the person we want to hitch our wagon to, that we want to show that Trump is going too far. This is the argument being made by Van Hollen, by Cory Booker, like Mark had mentioned. Cory Booker, again, he just looking to continue to be front and center. He did not... He was very sheepish when they asked him, is he going to run for president? Signaling that, yeah, he's probably going to run for president. He's had that idea for over a decade now. Going back to the Obama administration, many people thought that he may be in the running against Hillary and yada, yada, yada. But he's one that isn't quite there, because he'll do something every once in a while that gets him mocked, gets him ridiculed, gets him criticized. But anyway, he likes this attention, just like Boasberg does, just like Van Hollen does. And so he is going to El Salvador. Now, Van Hollen yesterday was denied access to Garcia. We're going to talk about that, but we're going to give you some more updates on Garcia. Keep your comments coming in. Keep your waves coming in. We're just getting started, and it's not going to be all Garcia this morning, but definitely a good chunk at the beginning of the program here, because I realize I haven't even scratched the surface, and we do want to talk. Oh, the big story outside of Garcia. Did you see, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, did you see there is speculation that Elise Stefanik may run for governor of New York State? Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people interested in that, but no one more interested than Mike Lawler to find out what her decision will be. I will say, Republicans, luckily Elise Stefanik has a lot of name recognition, but a lot of, and I think they said $10 million in her war chest. Republicans very often wait, in my opinion, too long to declare who's going to be their candidate. If you look at Lee Zeldin, and when we talked with Assemblyman Joe Sempolinski last time he was on the program, I believe he said that Lee Zeldin declared right around April 8th or 9th of the year before. So we're already almost 10 days behind when Lee Zeldin originally declared, and look how good Lee Zeldin did. So if she is going to run, I hope she declares it soon. I like the fact that she has name recognition. She is popular among Republicans. Just kind of interesting, kind of something to think and keep in the back of your mind, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. A beautiful morning on Market Street here in Corning. Thank you to Boss Security for our view of the Gaffer District. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street, said Market Street in Corning. Comments from viewers. What's up with these judges and lawyers? They're a huge part of the problem. Harvard U and the like. Yeah, Harvard University. We've got some updates on that a little bit later on in the program as well. Comment from Mark. Heck yeah, I hope Elise Stefanik runs. We need a Republican governor. I think when it comes to name recognition, star power, it does bring some excitement. There's speculation that she may run. Okay, back to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a now deported illegal alien who's accused of being a member of the MS-13 gang, who was living illegally in Maryland, has a record of being a violent, repeat wife beater. Now, keep in mind, this is who Chris Van Hollen said he will not rest until he brings Garcia back. This is who he wants amongst the general population in America. In the filing from back in 2021, written in his wife's own handwriting, she alleges Garcia repeatedly beat her, writing, quote, "At this point, I'm afraid to be close to him. I have multiple photos, videos of how violent he can be and all the bruises he has left me." Vasquez is her name, Jennifer Vasquez, alleged that Garcia punched and scratched her on her eye, leaving her bleeding. He also allegedly threw her laptop on the floor. She wrote that on another day, Garcia got angry again, started yelling, and ripped her shirt and shorts off before grabbing her arms and leaving marks. Vasquez recalled 2 times in 2020 that Garcia hit her, leaving a purple eye. Additionally, the Department of Homeland Security released court documents regarding Garcia, which cast further doubt on the Democrats' narrative about his innocence. DHS, and that's one thing I thought they were playing up to. They were playing their hand a little too fast and loose, which was, you don't know if he's really an MS-13. You're not positive of that. Really flimsy evidence, I think, is what Jake Tapper said. Well, according to this Department of Homeland Security court documents, it says they say it definitively proves Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang. According to Prince George County's police department interview shared with Fox News by DHS, local police discovered Garcia during a murder investigation. Police found him loitering in a Home Depot parking lot with another known MS-13 gang member in possession of illicit drugs back in 2019. The police department's gang unit MS-13 intelligence squad conducted an interview with Abrego Garcia and contacted a past proven and reliable source who identified him as an active member of MS-13 with the Westerns clique. So that's a part of the MS-13 gang. With the rank of, I don't know how you say this, Chicao, and the moniker of Shele. The news comes as Democrats clamor for the return of Garcia, who they say was, quote, wrongly deported to a maximum security prison in his home country as part of the Trump administration's efforts to crack down on illegal migrant crime. And we know about the judge's order yesterday. Representative Maxwell Frost. Oh, and Pam Bondi's upset because they keep calling in the media, and they keep the Democrat Party keeps calling him a Maryland man, referring to him as a Maryland man who was wrongly deported. No, he's an El Salvadorian resident who came here illegally. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was wrongly deported to El Salvador as part of the Trump administration's government-funded kidnapping rampage, said Representative Maxwell Frost from Florida. He is rotting away in a foreign prison where his life is in danger. We need to go there now to make sure he's okay. We're going to talk about Chris Van Hollen here in just a moment. But the more we find out about Abrego Garcia, the more I stand by my original claims that this is a tough sell to the American people that the Democrats and the media are trying to make. A repeated abuser of his wife, known ties to MS-13, and first and foremost, an illegal migrant right from the jump, already breaking the law from day one, and yet this is who they will not rest until they have returned. I don't know. It's not, personally, the side I would want to be fighting for. As DHS posted, Kilmar Abrego Garcia is not a Maryland man. He is an MS-13 gang member involved in human trafficking who entered the United States illegally. His deportation to El Salvador was always going to be the end result. So keep that in mind. If you see someone or an outlet reporting him as a Maryland man who is wrongfully detained in El Salvador, you know that is not going to be a friendly news outlet. You know that is going to be a complete biased news outlet. And if you see that from a politician, you know that they are lying to you. They continued, while Senator Van Hollen and the mainstream media peddle a sob story about a brutal MS-13 gang member, Secretary Noem stands with the victims of illegal alien crime. We hear far too much about the gang members and criminal sob stories and not enough about the victims. DHS Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin posted some more details about his arrest. In addition to being apprehended with other MS-13 members, he was found with rolls of cash and drugs and wearing what is effectively MS-13's uniform. Speaking with Fox News on Monday, McLaughlin said Garcia is exactly where he belongs, in his home in El Salvador. The media would love for you to believe that this is some media darling, that he is some Maryland father. But Osama bin Laden was also a father, and yet he wasn't a good guy. And they are actually both terrorists. He should be in this El Salvador prison for terrorists, and I hope he will remain there. Now, Chris Van Hollen was denied access to Garcia, but he said that he won't rest. That's an exact quote from Senator Chris Van Hollen. I know earlier I said representative. I didn't mean that, and I knew instantly I meant to say that when I came back from break. Senator Chris Van Hollen said he, quote, won't rest until Garcia is brought back to the United States. Van Hollen has described the man as wrongfully abducted and traveled to El Salvador in an attempt to discuss efforts to bring the man back to Maryland, where he was living illegally. I've been in El Salvador all day fighting for the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia, Van Hollen said. The Trump administration can lie all they want, but the court said they failed to show he was part of MS-13. This is about bringing home a man they admit shouldn't have been abducted. I won't rest until then. So I know we're not Maryland residents, but is this what you want your senator to be focused on? Bringing back an illegal alien who has a history of spousal abuse, who is believed with very good background information to be a member of MS-13. This is who you're fighting for. This is what you're showing your constituents this is the fight that you have. Keep in mind, while this trip is being paid for by taxpayers. Same with Cory Booker's. Cory Booker is going to be there. I'm sure he's very upset that Chris Van Hollen has taken away some of his steam, some of the attention. Van Hollen did release the following statement on his official Senate website shortly. After, if you remember, we're going to talk about this in a moment, but Rachel Morin's mother said, Van Hollen has talked more about this terrorist than he ever did about the murder of my daughter by an illegal immigrant. The only record that Fox could find of what Van Hollen said at the time, that the verdict, this was after yesterday's verdict, the verdict brings a measure of justice that Rachel's family so deserves. With the conviction of Rachel Morin's killer, will not return Rachel to her family where she rightfully belongs. This verdict brings a measure of justice that they so deserve. I'm grateful to the law enforcement officers who brought her killer into custody and for our legal process for delivering the justice. Anyway, we're going to talk about that because Patty Morin, Rachel Morin's mother, gave a sort of press conference yesterday, and the media did not want to cover that, but it all ties in with the story of Mr. Garcia and the crackdown on illegal immigration. We got to take a short break. A little bit more about Garcia, but then we do have to move on because I want to get to New York State. But as I said, thoughts on Elise Stefanik's potential run for New York State governor. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Let's go through some viewer comments before we get back to the topics of the day. Fred writes in, good morning, Frank. Well, good morning, Fred. Move on. You're spending way too much time on Democrat antics. What about the many good things the administration is finding buried in classified documents? Well, if there's one thing I've always said is I need more consultants. Thank you, Fred. I don't know. I think it's worth mentioning the Democrat antics, but I will defer to the audience. If people disagree with the topics that I'm discussing, feel free to write in. Thank you, Fred. Ken writes in, as you know, there's a big controversy surrounding the MS-13 dirtbag that was deported to El Salvador. The Dems are saying that he wasn't given his due process rights, which don't apply to him because he isn't a citizen. Everyone on both sides of the issue knows that he shouldn't be in this country. But the left can't say that because this isn't about the violation of this criminal's rights. It's about setting up a narrative that every illegal immigrant that broke the law coming into this country must be given due process. The Dems know that this will slow the process of deportation to a snail's pace, and the process to deport 20 million illegal immigrants that don't qualify for asylum will be mostly pushed into the 2028 or beyond presidencies, which Democrats obviously hope to win with the help of the illegals voting, which is also why the Dems are against fair elections. They're obviously counting on the illegals voting. Thank you, Ken. So again, the El Salvador is refusing to allow Senator Van Hollen to meet with, and listen to this headline from the Washington Post, the mistakenly deported man. Now, if you recall, Stephen Miller kind of highlighted how the mistake was a clerical error, but not in the way that the media is presenting. And they responded to what Van Hollen had to say. Because keep in mind, Chris Van Hollen's constituency includes the mom of 5, Rachel Morin, who was murdered by an illegal alien. So keep that in mind. That was his constituent. She was his constituent. While Van Hollen claims Abrego Garcia was illegally abducted and needs to come home, Trump's rapid response team said the alien is, quote, already home. The White House tweeting out, Senator Chris Van Hollen is currently in El Salvador out of concern for an illegal immigrant MS-13 gang member and human trafficker for whom he won't stop fighting until he's home. The criminal illegal immigrant is already home. He's a Salvadorian citizen. Where was the Maryland senator's concern when one of his own constituents, Rachel Morin, an innocent mother of 5, was brutally murdered by an illegal immigrant? Van Hollen didn't even bother to contact her family. Where was his concern when an accused killer was allowed to roam free due to the so-called sanctuary policies of his state's second most populous county? Van Hollen didn't say a word about the radical policies that put his constituents at risk. What a great response. In another post, Chris Van Hollen will go on an international mission to bring a deported illegal immigrant back to America, but won't even meet with the family of Maryland mother Rachel Morin. That's how little he thinks of Americans. Steve Chung also slamming Van Hollen, saying the senator and his bedwetting friends have displayed more concern and sympathy for an illegal MS-13 gang member than victims of horrific migrant crimes. He is a complete disgrace to his office and should be thoroughly shamed for his disgusting acts. Tom Homan said he's disgusted by the senator's trip to El Salvador. He wasn't abducted, said Tom Homan. He's an MS-13 gang member classified as a terrorist that was removed from this country. So we got rid of a dangerous person. An El Salvadorian national was returned to the country of El Salvador. So he's home. He also echoed the Trump officials who called Garcia a public safety threat, insisting his removal was exactly what should have happened. He said he's disgusted to see Van Hollen visiting. The murder of Rachel Morin. Listen to the testimony and listen to the mother on Hannity last night. If you're not human, your heart wasn't broken. It happened in his state. But rather than taking care of the constituents in his state, the victims of illegal crime in his state, he's going to run to El Salvador to protect MS-13 terrorists. And that ties in with, and they said they found Garcia with rolls of cash and drugs. They found his connection to MS-13. But the Trump administration ripping into CNN, MSNBC for refusing to air Rachel Morin's mom's emotional White House remarks because they let her speak at the White House, and CNN and MSNBC refused to cover her comments in which she described the barbaric murder of her daughter Rachel by an illegal immigrant. During the Angel Mom speech in the White House briefing room, MSNBC opted to instead cover Bernie Sanders' rally in Montana and interview a columnist. Over on CNN, the network discussed Democrat California Governor Gavin Newsom and ran a segment on the NBA instead of covering that White House speech, calling it shameful. Shameful that CNN and MSNBC refused to take Angel Mom Patty Morin as she recounts the terrible tragedy of how an illegal killed her sweet daughter, Rachel. Elon Musk replied with a 100% emoji on that post. Senior White House advisor Stephen Miller declared that CNN and MSNBC's contempt for the victims of migrant crime is reprehensible. But this is exactly, and the two tie in. Comcast outlets spent days misleading the American public, implying that Garcia was merely a law-abiding U.S. citizen, just a regular Maryland man. When the truth comes out, they ignore it, the Trump administration official said. Joe Scarborough was ripping into J.D. Vance over this, saying that he didn't learn about due process at his quote-unquote uppity school. Morning Joe host Joe Scarborough slammed J.D. Vance for griping about due process for deported migrants and mocked the vice president for not learning the law at the, quote, uppity school where he got his degree. Now, that school was Yale, from which Vance graduated in 2013. It should also be noted that Yale rejected Joe Scarborough. So lashing out, and I'm not going to go through all what Joe said, saying that he never learned about due process. And to Ken's point, they're trying to essentially change the narrative that every single illegal immigrant will get this due process, which I think it was Stephen Miller said would take hundreds of years. I don't want to go in. Oh, and finally on this topic, because I do want to move on to Harvard and some other issues. According to the Daily Beast, this is the exact moment America stopped being a nation of laws. Yep, you're in that time right now, according to the Daily Beast. So this is the moment while the Supreme Court said it's a very gray area of, the administration should work in any way possible to return Mr. Garcia. They're relying on the administration having any integrity at all and having any desire whatsoever to return him, which they do not. So there you go. I guess according to the Daily Beast, you saw the moment. The exact moment in which America stopped being a nation of laws. Your thoughts? We are going to talk about at least Stefanik's potential run for governor. We do have other things about the Trump administration, a couple quick updates on Harvard, a couple quick updates on Letitia James, but most importantly, want to hear your comments. Keep them coming in, and we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live and proudly from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us. A couple comments from viewers. Mark says the Dems will do anything to get in the spotlight, even if it's upholding a no-good illegal. When are the Dems going to learn we are not going for lies and deception anymore? And to think that specifically Van Hollen, that one of his constituents was that Rachel Morin, who was brutally murdered by an illegal alien, and then to not realize the optics of saying you will not rest, not for your constituents, not for the people of your state and for the country, you will not rest for a man who was in this country illegally, was essentially returned to his home, but in the meantime, while he was here in the United States, repeatedly beat his wife, who is believed to, with very good evidence, to be a member of MS-13. But that is who you are fighting for on your taxpayer-funded trip. That's who you will not stop fighting for that, Mr. Garcia. I don't know if this is the side I would want to be on, but that's where Van Hollen and Cory Booker and others, that's the side they're on. Comment from a different viewer. Being bipartisan for once, can I suggest a solution to this Garcia problem? Of course you can. U.S. District Judge Paula Zinnes can allow Van Hollen to adopt Garcia and then should be free to repatriate him. Well, that's an interesting, put your money where your mouth is, Van Hollen. I like it. By the way, two quick things on Harvard. The IRS is now making plans to rescind Harvard's tax-exempt status. A final decision is expected soon, according to sources, two sources familiar with the matter. Now, keep it in mind, it is CNN, so whatever you think about the two sources that they may or may not have. The administration has already blocked more than $2 billion in funding to Harvard, and now taking away or attempting to take away their tax-exempt status. Just kind of a little bit of an update from a story that we brought to you yesterday. President Trump said just the other day, perhaps Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it keeps pushing political, ideological, and terrorist-inspired supporting sickness. Remember, tax-exempt status is totally contingent on acting in the public interest. Now, Harvard thought that this is a fight that was in their best interest, that this fight, not giving in to Trump's demands, was a fight that would benefit them in the long run. I wonder if they still feel that same way as soon as they heard the term tax exempt. Did you also know, and I just heard this today, just to show you how these educational institutions are big business. Did you know Harvard is the fourth largest employer in all of Massachusetts with over 18,700 people on its payroll? Now, keep in mind, before you feel bad for Harvard, they have an over $53 billion endowment, but they could lose their tax-exempt status. On CNN, Education Secretary Linda McMahon said that she doesn't know whether Harvard will lose its status, but argued it was certainly worth looking into. We'll see what the IRS comes back with relative to Harvard. I certainly think, in elite schools, especially that have these incredible large endowments, we should probably have to look into that. She added that it is her guess that the IRS is also looking at tax-exempt statuses of other universities. Also, the Trump administration is threatening to withdraw Harvard from the Student and Exchange Visitor Program. This breaking yesterday. Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem demanded that the Ivy League school provide DHS with information related to potentially illegal and violent activities Harvard foreign exchange students have engaged in as part of the Trump administration's crackdown on anti-Semitism. Noem writing, "It is a privilege to have foreign students attend Harvard University, not a guarantee. The United States government understands that Harvard University relies heavily on foreign student funding from over 10,000 foreign students to build and maintain their substantial endowment. At the same time, your institution has created a hostile learning environment for Jewish students due to Harvard's failure to condemn anti-Semitism. And just like I find it hard that Chris Van Hollen, Cory Booker, and others are trying to, I find it odd that they're trying to defend Garcia, wife beater, alleged MS-13 gang member, etc., here illegally, why they hitched their wagon to that car. I find the same thing with Harvard, why they thought this fight was worth it, this fight to support anti-Semitic, anti-American, anti-Israel, anti-police protests. That fight was worth it to them, even with the threat of losing that $2 billion from the federal government. And now, I think they bit off more than they could chew, because now they're talking about their tax-exempt status and withdrawing them from the student and exchange visitor program. Harvard, as you are aware, said that they would not comply with the demands issued by Trump. And it's going to cost them. Noam on Wednesday announced DHS canceled 2 grants from the department to the university, totaling another $2.7 million, and declared Harvard unfit to receive taxpayer money. Harvard, bending the knee to anti-Semitism, driven by its spineless leadership, fuels a cesspool of extremist riots and threatens our national security. With anti-American pro-Hamas ideology poisoning its campuses and classroom, Harvard's position as a top institution of higher learning is a distant memory. America demands more from universities entrusted with taxpayer dollars. She then threatened to withdraw the school's certification from the Student and Exchange Visitor Program if the institution refuses to comply with the latest Trump administration request by April the 30th. Now it seems, unless you're going to an outlet that I'm not, Harvard has resisted, if you will, commenting on most of this. So did they, in your opinion, bite off more than they can chew? Thought that they would lose that $2 billion, though, maybe tap into their $53 billion endowment for the time being just to get through it, because they wanted to continue to support these anti-Semitic protests. They wanted to stand strong for these anti-Semitic protests, pro-Hamas protests, just like, and I guess will not rest. Like Senator Van Hollen, who stands strong with Garcia. We got to take another short break. Stay with us. Wrapping up hour number 1 when we return. Also, we'll read your comments and your thoughts on Elise Stefanik potentially running for governor. All that and much more. Stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We've got a comment from a viewer, and I'll keep it on the roof cam because it says, "Good morning, Frank. Is that actual sunshine from your roof cam? That's as rare as a Democrat with a clue," they write. Well, thank you. That is sunshine. What a beautiful view of historic Marcus Street because of Boss Security and the roof cam. Okay, we are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, wrapping up hour number 1. Again, we are not broadcasting a new episode tomorrow, so get your comments in today, or you'll have to wait till Monday. Comment from another viewer: Garcia could move right in Van Hollen's Kensington, Maryland house. I have trouble with that. Kensington, Maryland house. Yeah, why not? Right? I mean, if you will not rest, that would be one way to not get a lot of rest. Comment from a different viewer: "Good morning, Frank." Well, good morning. Steve here. Oh, hey, Steve. Remember, only the best go to Ivy League schools, the brightest and the leaders of tomorrow. That is why they have to reintroduce remedial math and reading. Yet that is the graduates that are looked for. Thank you, Steve. Good to hear from you. We're going to talk about Tish James when we come back, and that's going to lead into New York State issues like Stefanik. This coming from the New York Times. Stefanik, a Trump ally, might run against Governor Hochul next year. I like that it has to say a Trump. They just want the readers of the New York Times to know, don't support her. You might not like Hochul, but she's a Trump ally. Very interesting. All right, let's take a break, wrap up hour number 1, and enter into hour number 2. We will be right back, Frankly Speaking, here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Hour number 2 of Frankly Speaking. As we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio on Market Street in Corning, just reading some of our comments here. I got distracted. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We've got a lot to cover on New York State issues. We are going to talk a little bit more about the Trump administration. We can go back to Boasberg's ruling. We can go back to the Garcia conversation or Harvard. But right now, we're moving along. But I will read all your comments. Comment number one. If I heard it correctly, Mr. Garcia originally was from El Salvador. And if he is, why don't they release him into the country of El Salvador where he can legally apply for status in the U.S.? I don't think he would get that status. Well, he's here illegally. He had connections, allegedly, to MS-13 with some verifiable documents to prove that. And known wife beater. And he was sent to that prison in El Salvador. So I don't think there's any chance of him getting legal status here in the United States, but I understand your point. Thank you very much. Mark writes in, maybe Cory Booker, will give a 25-hour speech to the El Salvadorian president to get that illegal back. Yeah, well, maybe that would be one way for the president to cave there and say, enough with the bloviating, enough with the speech. You can have them. All right, Tish James. She listed her Virginia house as her principal residence. The New York Post visited that neighborhood, and her neighbors say they've never seen her as she faces this mortgage fraud probe. She attested in the document, I hereby declare I intend to occupy this property as my principal residence. And the reason she did that, even though she was obviously Attorney General in New York State, so she couldn't live in Virginia, she did this to get better interest rates. I'm not going to go into the whole house, and we talked about this, that her father was listed on one as her husband. It gets very weird. Obviously, some real questions, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If she's going to go after Trump for documents having misinformation on them, she should have known what skeletons were in her closet. The New York Post editorial board says, memo to State Attorney General Tish James. If you're going to drag a former U.S. president to court for misleading financial institutions, best not be accused of doing the exact same thing yourself. Now, keep in mind the supposed quote-unquote victims of what Trump did said not only were they not victims, they made money. They would do it again. But not in this instance where James was trying to allegedly get better interest rates. James allegedly falsified records in 2023 per Federal Housing Financial Agency Director William Poult to get a more favorable mortgage on a Virginia property she claimed as her, quote, principal residence, even while residing in New York and serving as New York's Attorney General. Poult cited other potentially fraudulent James statements, misrepresenting her 5-unit Brooklyn property as having just 4 units and claiming her father was her husband in his criminal referral to the Justice Department. The AG's purchase of the Virginia property came right around the time she was launching a civil rights case against the Trump organization for overvaluing many of its properties in documents to banks, a case where she won a $464 million judgment pending appeals. Now, true, James granted a relative, Seamus Thompson Hairston, her power of attorney to sign the document authorizing the purchase. White-collar fraud has reported. But in her Trump case, she held him and his sons responsible for documents similarly prepared by underlings. She may complain this is dirty politics posing as a pursuit of justice. But then again, she ran for Attorney General promising to scour every Trump document and action in a fishing expedition to build some case, any case, against the then former president. So far, she hasn't addressed the details of the allegation. A spokesman simply waved at, quote, cherry-picked information. We look forward to her explaining the principal residence thing. Back when James launched her probe of Trump in 2019, she famously huffed that no one is above the law, not even the president. Surely that goes for a state attorney general, too. There is a really interesting piece by Andrea Pizer at the New York Post. And it's called The Tish James I Know is a Bully and a Hypocrite. I first ran into a little-known New York City councilwoman named Letitia James in the aughts at a Brooklyn news conference. The news conference was about rapper Foxy Brown. It seems Foxy had been busted again over some bad behavior. And among the people who came out to defend her was James, whose real agenda had nothing to do with hip-hop or crime. It was all about making her a name for herself And she did, for all the wrong reasons. James, who I never met or even heard of, made a beeline for me at the event and started haranguing me. But not about the troubled recording artist. She was furious about my columns supporting the still unbuilt Barclays Center, which I believed would revitalize a decrepit swath of Brooklyn and bring high-profile entertainment and jobs to a place where they were desperately needed. James was one of the project's most ardent opponents, and she demanded that I change my tune. I told her that my columns merely reflected my deeply held positions. Besides, I said, I really don't think it's appropriate that she confront me over something unrelated to the rapper in question, and attempted to walk away, but James followed me, continuing her unglued rant. She would not get out of my face. I thought she was nuts. And I don't want to go through all of the history of this, but she talked about the outcome, and she says, whatever the outcome of these allegations, James will likely live to regret her infamous declaration that no matter how rich or powerful you are, no one is above the law. I'd like to add this: no matter how big, rich, and powerful you think you are, hypocrites will always be exposed. So maybe think twice before you scold and harass a president or real estate developers or journalists, and look in the mirror. Okay, enough about James. Let's talk about Elise Stefanik. The New York Times reporting that Stefanik, a Trump ally, might run against Governor Hochul next year. She is, I find this hard to believe, because I remember when she first won her congressional seat, because we were similar in age, and I tried to get her on the show even though she wasn't in our district. It never worked out. The scheduling never worked out, but I remember being excited to watch her career, so it's hard to believe that she is a 6-term congresswoman already. Apparently, she has been talking behind the scenes to Republican power brokers, maybe, about a 2026 bid for governor. Now, this is a decision you have to make relatively quickly. As I mentioned in the first hour, Lee Zeldin had already declared at this point that he was running for governor over a year out. That helped his campaign. But I would argue that Elise Stefanik has bigger name recognition than Lee Zeldin did when he first entered the race. Now, she was, as you know, poised to be that UN ambassador when that fell through because the president needed her vote in Congress. The Congresswoman allies said yesterday that in the weeks since she returned to Congress, Republicans in Washington and New York had urged her to challenge Governor Hochul, and she is taking steps to explore the possibility. They believe that Ms. Hochul, a Democrat, is vulnerable and that Ms. Stefanik could put the state in play. If you look at Stefanik, she's very popular among Republicans, which is still essential for a Republican to win in New York. But she also has name recognition, and Governor Hochul is very unpopular, perhaps her least favorable ratings being the most recent. Now, she stoked speculation, this meaning Stefanik, about a potential candidacy in a speech Tuesday night as she accepted an award from the New York Republicans. The speech at the Plaza Hotel focused heavily on state issues, with Ms. Stefanik discussing pension debt, New York City's congestion pricing plan, and quality of life in Buffalo and Rochester. Afterwards, she told NY1 that she was, quote, honored to be considered for the role, and less than 24 hours later, she blasted out a statement mocking Hochul's latest poll numbers. That's a pretty big sign. Now, you know who's watching this very closely to see if she makes a decision. Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler has, and this was, I think, a mistake that he made, if I'm being honest. Mike Lawler, it's no secret that he's been running for governor, but he has not officially declared. If he officially declared, that may have kept Stefanik out of considering this, but instead, like I think Republicans do to their own chagrin, they wait too long in the governor's race to declare. Stefanik told NY1, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to fire Kathy Hochul once and for all. For so long, Democrats have had one-party rule in Albany, and it has caused a decay of our state. The people familiar with her thinking, and again, this coming from New York Times, quoting anonymous sources, so take it with a grain of salt, said Ms. Stefanik would also consider taking another role in Trump's administration or maintaining her leadership position in the House. She has seriously considered running for governor before in 2022 before declining to pass. Yeah, that was an interesting time, that 2022 race, when there was a lot of names being thrown around, potentially running for governor, and her name was one of them. She has gained more, for lack of a better word, fame since then. I think she has a name recognition because of her connection to the Trump administration. But talk about a bright future. her options are, well, stay in the House, get an even higher leadership position in the future, run for governor, or perhaps be a part of Trump's administration in a different avenue in the future. Those aren't bad places to be at 40 years old. Now, Stefanik's people have declined to comment on the issue. Now, and you've got to keep in mind, it is still a very much an uphill battle, especially when you're talking about an election during midterms, if there's any, as history has shown in the past, though not always the case, the party in power doesn't always do as well in the midterm. That could change this midterm. I'm not suggesting otherwise, but it's something that she has to keep in mind. First, and they always do this in the left type outlets, where they say Stefanik, when she was originally running, she was a moderate, didn't like Trump, and then she became all in on Trump. They always have to make sure that they mention that. Now, Hochul said, no matter who the GOP nominee is next year that I'll be running against, it will be an extreme MAGA Republican, and I look forward to that fight. What a cliche, generic statement by Governor Hochul. No matter who the GOP, no matter what, it's got to be an extreme MAGA Republican. And then this is when you know they're a little concerned, because this is the same thing that happened when Trump first declared that he was running for president after the golden escalator. Oh, that's the best thing that could ever happen to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton's won this. Hillary Clinton's got this so easily. The best thing that could ever happen to Democrats is Trump getting the Republican nominee. That is so cliche, and that's exactly what's happening here. That's why you know they're nervous. New York, saying other Democrats said they would relish facing the Congresswoman. New Yorkers want nothing to do with the clown show of Trump loyalists who are only focused on enabling Trump's agenda that is raising costs, gunning health care, and attacking New Yorkers' freedoms, said a spokesman for the state Democratic Party. Now, we know that the Republicans have made some inroads in New York. Trump receiving really good numbers in New York, not obviously winning, but receiving unprecedented numbers for Republicans. When I say unprecedented, since what, Reagan? Also, we saw Lee Zeldin do very well against Hochul. And we learned just the other day in that poll from Marist University that we talked about, I think it was on yesterday's program, that Governor Hochul's job performance is at just 39% approval. 39% approval. Now, the president, when hearing, if you recall, hearing about this, saying Congresswoman Elise Stefanik is great, sharing a video from her on CNBC discussing the fight with Harvard from the Trump administration. She is very popular with Republicans in New York, where she dedicated considerable resources to congressional swing states. Gerard Kazar, a chairman of the state Conservative Party, called her well-qualified, well-known, and a consummate New Yorker, and said that he would welcome her entry into the race. This I'm going to be honest with you. This concerns me, what I'm about to say. Ed Cox, who is the Republican state chair, declined to comment. And why this concerns me is that makes me wonder if he wants perhaps Mike Lawler or if he has somebody else in mind. Ed Cox has done this, and I think, in full disclosure, been on the wrong side of the issue numerous times on who he wants. He tends to go more moderate for who he wants as the nominee. But again, you can say, well, he's going moderate because maybe he could get some Democrat votes. It's not going to happen. He has not been successful. Let's boil it down. So if you remember Ed Cox, one of the deciding factors in why Donald Trump didn't run for governor of New York State, which was a very serious discussion, was because he said he did not want a primary. He didn't want to be bloodied up by a Republican primary. And I don't think this is any secret. I think this was public knowledge. Ed Cox at the time, who was a chair back then, wanted Rob Astorino. So once that Rob Astorino declared, Trump said, never mind, which worked out for the betterment of the country as a whole. And so in this case now, Ed Cox did eventually embrace President Trump when he was running for president. And having said that, he did cast the original vote, I guess, the one that put Trump over the edge for the delegates that he needed to be the Republican nominee. So not vote. I'm trying to think of what the exact term would be. I guess just he was that final yelling at the RNC saying that he's our nominee. But Ed Cox declining to comment raises some red flags to me. I wonder if he, or there's Mike Lawler's name's been thrown around, Bruce Blakeman, whose name is thrown around frequently in discussions like this. He's the Nassau County executive. So it'll be interesting, and maybe it was just so new to Ed Cox, that's why he didn't comment. But boy, that would shake things up if at least Stefanik gets involved in the gubernatorial race. We've got a couple other quick things on that. Then about the New York State budget. A lot here about the Democrat Party in general. Obviously, we've been talking about it. AOC is the star. AOC is the, I would argue, the face of the party. Now, we can laugh at that, or we can say, wow, that's how wild the Democrat Party has become. But there's a very good piece by the New York Post saying Republicans, take heed, take warning. Don't take this lightly. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. And read your comments. So stay with us. Running just a tad bit late on this first break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. That's our beautiful view of historic Market Street on this beautiful morning. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. All right, let's go to viewer comments. The Democrats know the president of El Salvador won't let Garcia go. It's smoke and mirrors to take attention away from what's really going on in the world. Doge, Israel, Syria, Congo, for example. You know, I think it is a distraction, but also you look at someone like Van Hollen or Cory Booker, they're using it to attempt to be the face of the Democrat Party, to move up in leadership, and most importantly, as it always is, fundraising. They know that the far left will then donate. That's why I had commented, I'm sure Cory Booker is upset that Van Hollen took away some of his steam and visited before he did. And the trip's most likely paid for by taxpaying dollars, so it's all a political show, a political circus. So very good, astute point. Ken writes in, everyone knows that James is dishonest. That's Letitia James. Is as dishonest as the day is long. She's a Democrat and a woman of color. There isn't a snowball's chance in Hades that she will be tried in New York. The best that could be hoped for is something coming out of Virginia, but that is very unlikely. Yeah, I think a lot of it, and I would agree, Ken, I don't think there's much of a chance that anything will come from it at the end of the day, but I think to show the hypocrisy was an important message that the Trump administration attempted. Now, of course, it's not getting as much coverage as it should be, but just sending out the warning that this kind of lawfare will no longer stand. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. Based on what Judge Boasberg said about defying the court, doesn't that contradict the three equal branches of the government and place the judiciary above the other two? Oh, that's a very good point. Kind of like what Marco Rubio said, that no one sets the foreign policy, except no court sets the foreign policy. It's the president of the United States. So, yes, he has taken almost like a leap, a jump ahead. That's a good point. Comment from a different viewer. There's light at the end of the tunnel for the Democrats. Joe Biden is back with a candle. Thank you very much. Comment from another viewer. Yes, we're busy on comments this morning. Ed Cox has never seen the whole picture. Now is the time for Stefanik. I think you raised a good point. Ed Cox, it was interesting because remember, Ed Cox was beaten by Nick Langworthy to be the Republican chair. Nick Langworthy did a good job, but wasn't there overly long because then he became congressman. And then I was surprised to learn that Ed Cox would get it again. I'm not going to, I told you my thoughts on that. I think he hasn't always been on the right side of these issues. And I think there's definitely room for, I think the Republican growth that we've seen is, in New York State that is because of Donald Trump, not because of the leadership of Ed Cox in the Republican Party. I think that's crystal clear, and Ed Cox was one who didn't originally really want, or didn't want Trump to be we'll say the only one running for governor, that he wanted a primary, he wanted to be Rob Astorino and not Donald Trump running for governor. And let me say, Donald Trump was taking it very seriously running for governor of New York State. It wasn't something he was taking lightly. His really only issue was he didn't want a primary. And it was later reported that Ed Cox was heard on the phone trying to get a primary opponent. So that was all. This is all old news. This is not to spend a whole show on criticizing Ed Cox. I met the man. I've interviewed him. I like him. I'm just saying that it's interesting to me, and it could all be overblown. He may have a comment soon, but in that piece, he would not comment on Stefanik running for governor. So I'm not suggesting that's him opposed to Stefanik. It just, to me, raised a concern or made me have some questions. That's all. Comment from a different viewer. Elise for governor is really exciting. Part of her campaign could include the fact that her age is slightly higher than Hochul's approval number. You're right, not by much. What, 2 points? Hochul's at 39, and Stefanik may only be 40, actually. I was thinking she was 41, but I think she's only 40. And just to quickly continue on that before we take another break, sources point out that Stefanik has about $10 million in potential campaign cash on hand, has a relatively high approval rating among state Republican voters, and even outran Trump in her rural district in 2024. According to a person with knowledge on the topic, said she is being advised and pushed to consider by allies of Trump and longtime friends. Elise has been approached by major donors, New York GOP leadership, and Trump world to run for governor, a second source said. A third said Stefanik is the most popular Republican in the state and performs far better than Trump. If anyone could win it, it would be her. But they did caution that she is just looking at this. But keep in mind, she did tweet out the poll numbers for Governor Hochul, saying the latest bombshell polling proves that every New Yorker already knows, that we must fire Kathy Hochul in 2026 to save New York. Her incompetence, corruption, and radical failed far-left policies have destroyed our great state, causing businesses and families to flee from crushing high taxes, out-of-control regulations, inept fiscal mismanagement, wide-open border sanctuary city policies, putting illegals first and New Yorkers last, and an out-of-control crime crisis due to Democrats' failed bail reform, defund the police policies. This polling shows we can win and save New York. That's what Stefanik tweeted out. So it's getting exciting. I would agree with that viewer. I would also say that I would agree with this piece from Politico. Elise Stefanik may run for New York governor. That's bad news for Mike Lawler. We got a car alarm going off. That would be bad news for Mike Lawler. And I would agree. He's someone that's been running for a long time, but never officially declared. So he has made a mistake. You may expect him to make that declaration very, very soon, but I think too little too late. She can still make the argument that she's going to run and not have his announcement really affect her at all. All right, let's take, and Hochul's trying to target her seat, meaning Stefanik's seat, House seat. Hochul's really interesting. She really wants to be a power broker. She wants to be the lead in the Democrat Party. She just doesn't have it. So she's attempting to flip Elise Stefanik's House seat. All right, we're going to talk more about Hochul when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security. Thank you, as always, to Boss Security. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. They're located right in Horseheads, and I'm located right in the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street. Comment from Ken. He says, if Elise runs and says she's going to Doge New York, she will win in a landslide. Thank you, Ken. That's pretty exciting, talking about Elise Stefanik potentially running for governor of New York State, though obviously nothing is official, just looking at the possibility. Governor Hochul made, in 2024, her and her husband made nearly $1.5 million. Now, why am I bringing this up? I don't know. You'll see in a second. The pair reported a combined income of $1,479,244. Now, that's down from about $1.9 million last year. Hochul made nearly $260,000 from her government salary. And then her husband works for a law firm where he made $949,000. Now, why am I bringing this up? And well, I guess maybe it's newsworthy. But also because Governor Hochul complained she couldn't afford eggs for an annual Easter event, even though, again, to reiterate, her and her husband made $1.5 million. She made the weird claim on the show Inside City Hall. Of course, this is why I say she's just not ready to be a power broker. She's just not ready to be some type of lead person in the Democratic Party. I think someone put it so perfectly on this program. A viewer said that Hochul wants to be Nancy Pelosi when she grows up. She just doesn't have it, right? So that's why she made the bizarre claim, because she attempted to hit Trump, to bash Trump on the price of eggs and other goods. Now, keep this in mind, coming from a party that not only stayed silent on your economic woes, that didn't even really stay silent during the Biden administration. They mocked and ridiculed you if you said you couldn't put groceries on the table. That's 4 years of Biden. Now Trump's been in office 100 days, and they're screaming, why hasn't he changed the economy yet? Why hasn't he fixed all the problems caused by 4 years of the Biden administration? It's so hypocritical. It's so disingenuous, but that's why Hochul just does not ready. She's not ready for prime time. Heaven help anybody who's going to use real eggs on Easter, Hochul told the host. I have an Easter egg roll at the governor's residence, inviting kids from the neighborhood over. I can't afford them. Governor Hochul, making $1.5 million with her husband, cannot afford eggs for an Easter egg roll at the governor's mansion. And I'm guessing she doesn't buy those out of pocket. I'm guessing you and I buy those out of our pocket. North Country Assemblyman Chris Togg said she should be ashamed of herself. And by the way, Chris Togg used to be a dairy farmer. The governor might find it amusing to make a statement like that or think she's some sort of comedian. But for millions of New Yorkers, not being able to afford eggs or even the basic necessities is no joke. And he raises a very good point. This is another example of being that condescending attitude that Democrats have when you talk about prices. This mocking, she attempted to mock Trump with it, but really just made herself a laughing stock, made herself prove how unaware she is. $1.5 million her and her husband made. And she wants to joke about not having the money to buy eggs for an Easter egg roll. Even Democrats found the comments, as the New York Post so eloquently puts it, soft-boiled. Assemblymember Marcela Mendez, a Democrat from Brooklyn, said she should be more concerned about whether everyday folks can afford eggs and what is she going to do about it. State Senator Gustavo Rivera, another Democrat from the Bronx, fumed that the governor was boneheaded, particularly as she presides over a botched overhaul of a Medicaid program, leaving unclear numbers leaving a number of home care assistants unpaid. Riviera saying every single thing that happens, if people can't afford to eat, if people can't afford their rent, if people are getting hurt as consumers, if they're losing their workers, all of it, the governor owns it. Every single blanking thing. Now, the talks of soaring prices, the governor's office is using phony eggs for Saturday's events after using the real things in years past. The governor was telling the truth. For the first time, the annual Easter egg roll at the executive residence, which hosts the kids of law enforcement officers, local community members, and state workers, won't feature real eggs because of high costs. So she can't take one for the team and take out, maybe stop at the ATM, buy enough real eggs to support the kids of law enforcement, local community members, and state workers. They're going to use fake eggs. And she's doing that to score what she thinks is political points, and all it did was upset and anger both Republicans and Democrats and people that struggle to put food on the table after 4 disastrous years of the Biden administration, but also the disastrous policies of Governor Hochul in New York, as we talk about the high taxes, the high cost of living in New York, and she can't even reach into her own pocket to buy real eggs for the kids of law enforcement, local community members, and state workers. and you look at how expensive and why that poll that we had yesterday showed how many people have that 5-year plan to leave New York State because they just can't afford it. And she tried to use Easter as an attempt to mock the president after the president being in office 100 days, demanding that he fix all the economic woes caused of 4 years of Biden, fix it in 100 days. Unbelievable. Now, Trump and Hochul are going at it with a war of words. We'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking on WYDC TV. Big Fox will be right back. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio. A couple comments from viewers. Hochul's policies have put farms out of business. Great point. That is a very great point. That's why she just does not have it. And Ken highlights that. Do you remember during the gubernatorial race, in an attempt to say how safe New York City is, Hochul said that, quote, she walks the streets of New York City every day, end quote. She is truly a Biden Democrat. When she is off script, she says stupid things. I would agree, Ken. She's not, but even her scripted speeches are awkward. And look, scripted speech at the DNC when they put her not at a primetime hour, but they did let her speak at the DNC. And she screwed up the opening. And that was all scripted. So, yeah, she just doesn't have it. I mean, let's face it. She was lieutenant governor under Cuomo, but it's not as if she was governor. She just does not have that that politics bone, if you will. She tries. She comes off very choppy, very off-putting. And when she does go off script, as you said, says some really wacky things. Comment from a different viewer. Hochul should use the high egg prices to share the true meaning of Easter, which doesn't include eggs. I think that's a very good point. Thank you. I don't see her doing that. Okay. Trump and Hochul in a war of words as the New York appellate panel decides Trump's appeal of a $480 million fraud penalty as it drags into the second year. Governor Hochul stands accused of using her power over state judges to threaten the president. Not a good idea. Again, showing you her lack of knowledge. White House sources claim Hochul told Trump, I control the judges, during a February meeting in the Oval Office over congestion tax. Now, Hochul denies making the statement. But the president, and sources said, perceived the conversation as an implicit threat relating to his appeal against a civil fraud ruling in February of 2024. A legal source familiar with the Oval Office discussion said the governor asked the president to drop his opposition to the $9 congestion tax she opposed on New Yorkers, abandon a gas pipeline he favors, and provide federal funding for wind projects and an upgrade of Penn Station. Hochul is making demands while, quote, keeping the appeal hanging over his head, said the source. It feels like extortion and blackmail. Now, the governor's spokesman, A.V. Small, says somebody may have misheard or be lying. Governor Hochul has never said this or anything similar to President Trump or anyone. The governor respects the independence of the judiciary and has never attempted to interfere in ongoing cases and does not have any role to play in the judicial process, nor did she ever say that she did. Someone must have completely misheard the governor during this conversation, or they're purposefully lying to advance a political agenda. A senior Trump administration said, of course she would deny attempting to extort the president of the United States, just like she denied overseeing the weaponization of justice in her own state. Meanwhile, a cabinet member present at the 1-hour Oval Office meeting did not contradict the president's recollection of the conversation. Another cabinet source who did not attend the meeting said Hochul has since tried to integrate herself with Trump by offering to rename a train hall after him. And I meant to say ingratiate. In response, Small told the Post that the governor considered the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan a mentor, and that under no circumstance would she ever. So it's this war of words. My goodness, back and forth. Boy, if she did that, I think she's biting off more than she can chew. But she did say that it's closer. We're getting closer to some type of agreement on discovery law. But the Post editorial board said anyone who thinks a deal on the state's discovery laws that Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie announced Tuesday will significantly curb crime best think again. Lawmakers appear to have agreed to just a fraction of the fixes Governor Hochul saw in those laws, which dictate the what evidence prosecutors must collect. And her ask was itself but a fraction of the legislative repair that is actually needed. As of Wednesday afternoon, not all the key players, including Hochul, had signed off on Hastie's deal, whose details remain murky and still liable to morph considerably. But one supposedly key change appears to narrow the requirement for district attorneys to gather all evidence related to the charges, rather than to the broader case. Not good enough. Hochul wanted the law to require only evidence that is relevant. Why would you want to include evidence that isn't relevant? Which makes eminent sense. Why require evidence that's irrelevant, even if somehow related to the case or the charges? Yet it's not clear if she's getting the fix. Some sources say she may, or at least that they'll stick the word relevant in there somewhere, which means some slight rollbacks of one crazy requirement that forces judges to dismiss more cases and prosecutors not to pursue them at all, so that lots more criminals go free on technicalities. So this says Hochul's push for any moves to bolster public safety have delayed the budget a few weeks. But the spending plan itself is a train wreck. The governor wants to spend a ludicrous $250 billion. Lawmakers are fighting to shell out billions more, and both sides are now eyeing some added tax hikes, all while ignoring the near certainty of cuts in federal funding, as well as tax revenue shortfalls if the economy slows. So much for what Hochul called an affordability agenda and efforts to hang on to the tax base. If all adds up to a recipe for doom, might as well change New York State's motto to ever downward. Yes, and this is when she's mocking Trump because of the cost of eggs while she's making this state completely unaffordable to live. When we come back, a little bit about the Democrat Party. We're also going to talk a little bit here about the Trump administration. We're moving quickly. We only got 15 minutes left together. Keep in mind, we do not have a brand new show tomorrow. We have Good Friday off, so please keep that in mind and get all your comments in. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. Thank you again to Boss Security in Horseheads for our picturesque view of Marcus Street, where we happen to be broadcasting live in the Hesselson studio. Some comments from viewers. If the governor is so good, why no budget? That's a very good point. Thank you for that. Still no word as of right now. Albany's not getting paid. Carl Hastie wanted to change that they all got paid, even though they weren't doing their jobs and there was no budget. Comment from a different viewer. This is the same Hochul that needs how much for kids to leave their phones at home? $13.5 million, and New York City said that just wasn't sufficient. They needed more. $13.5 million in the budget to ban cell phones in schools. Now, I think you or I would say, just ban them. Why would there be a cost? Why don't you just say to the teachers, don't allow them to use it? They're prohibited. They're off limits. But I guess the $13.5 million being used, I don't know, for shelves or something to put them on. I'm confused by it as well. It's one of the issues that we highlighted so frequently. Comment from a different viewer. Hi, Frank. Well, hi. Good morning from Litchfield, Pennsylvania. Hey, thanks. I love our Pennsylvania viewers. Appreciate it. Have a great Resurrection Sunday. And remember, Trump's right about everything. Thank you very much. And thank you for... So I'm sorry we've been focusing a lot on New York issues to our PA friends, but watch it as a warning. Heed what we say, because you guys sometimes in Pennsylvania tend to emulate New York when you shouldn't. You've done that a little bit more. Not you, this viewer specifically, as you can tell by their comment, but Pennsylvania, don't look to your neighbors in the north for being an example of what to do. Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez electrify Democrats who want to fight Trump, says the New York Times. Well, we know the New York Times has all but endorsed AOC for president. And senator, and leadership positions. Now, Isaac Shore, who I like Isaac Shore's writing at the New York Post, and I think this is an important conversation to have. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has come a long way since 2018. When she first arrived on the political scene by beating out not just an incumbent, but a member of her party's leadership in a Democratic primary contest, she was a rebel, an avatar of insurgent impulses within her coalition, and among Republicans, something of a joke. Now she's the Democrat Party's most popular elected official. A Yale University poll released this week found that among Democrats, Ocasio-Cortez boasts the single highest net favorability rating of all of the party's many potential 2028 presidential candidates. She has a favorability amongst Democrats of 62%. In addition, 41% of the same group said they'd have a strongly favorable opinion of the progressive congresswoman. Again, the largest proportion to say as much about any Democrat. And when asked who they would support if the 2028 Democrat presidential primaries were held today, AOC finished a very strong second. Former Vice President Harris at 28% was the only prospective candidate to edge her out, and that's because she had just spent $2 billion for name recognition. It's hard to overstate just how impressive a feat this is, especially considering the 35-year-old New Yorker also had the second highest name recognition in the poll, behind only Harris. Harris is a very, very soft frontrunner, if she can even be called that. The 2024 presidential nominee lost every single battleground state to Donald Trump last fall. As Trump continues to facilitate liberal teeth gnashing through his second term, anger at Harris over her dismal performance will only grow. And so will Democrats' appetite for a fire breather like AOC, who can count on Bernie Sanders to throw his full weight behind her. With AOC well positioned to make a run at the Democratic nomination in 2028, no doubt some Republicans will be giddy at the prospect of facing down the self-described socialist and demonstrated champagne tastes. National Review's Rich Lowry has gone so far as to submit that if she's the party's future, Democrats stand no chance. It's true that any competent GOP campaign will make significant hay of AOC's glaring vulnerabilities. And we're not going to go through all of those. She's only just become constitutionally eligible for the Oval Office, but already has an adoring national following that hangs on her every word, as her cross-country tour with Sanders this month demonstrates. The enthusiasm she inspires on the left is matched only by that which Trump evokes on the right. She's a rock star, AOC, one fan told the Post. It's like Madonna and AOC. It's not the only similarity between the current president and the woman who might very well be vying to succeed him. While some of AOC's far-left positions, including her anti-fossil fuel crusade and support for punitive tax rates, would likely hurt her in the polls, it's more important that she would offer Americans a bold vision. After all, not every policy Trump campaigned on has been popular on its own. Yet she's overcome voters' reservations about them because they come as part of a larger, coherent program that's anything but timid. As Ronald Reagan put it, the American electorate rewards those who bear banners of bold, unmistakable color rather than pale pastels. AOC waves just such a banner and has more raw political talent in her pinky than the last three Democrat nominees combined. 7 years ago, she was a punchline. But right now, she has as good a chance as anyone of becoming our next president. That's Isaac Shore. Take it for what it's worth. All right, we got to take a short break. We'll be right back. Wrapping up today's edition of Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security. Thank you so much, Boss Security. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, wrapping up today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Comments from viewers. With the talk of raising taxes yet again in New York, they need to change the slogan on the sign from the Empire State to the Vampire State, sucking the lifeblood from their citizens. Very good point. This one threw me off because both of them started with the same beginning as comments from two different viewers. The first one, the $13.5 million is the buy-in for the teachers union. The other viewer says the $13.5 million might be for making crying rooms if the kids can't have their phones. That could be as well. I thought an appropriate way to wrap up today's edition of Frankly Speaking. One last thing. In an unprecedented move, according to Politico, DNC officials are going to spend big money to take down fellow Democrats. That's the plan of David Hogg, the DNC vice chair. He wants to even take down some safe incumbents, get new, fresh blood in there. The ones that are ineffective, asleep at the wheel, Democrats. Ooh, you could be playing with fire. All right. I kind of promised I would mention this earlier in the week, and we ran out of time. And I thought, I'll save it for today because this is our last edition of Frankly Speaking before Easter. We're not going to have a new broadcast tomorrow, but there's a classic edition, so you still want to tune in. But the Trump administration, the Trump White House is planning an extraordinary celebration for Holy Week. So this came out, I believe, on Sunday. And we're going to read the proclamation that the president sent out to wrap up today's edition of Frankly Speaking. This week, and this is the president of the United States, this week, Melania and I join in prayer with Christians celebrating the crucifixion and resurrection of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the living Son of God who conquered death, freed us from sin, and unlocked the gates of heaven for all of humanity. Beginning with Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and culminating in what begins the Holy Thursday with the Mass of the Lord's Supper, followed by Good Friday, and reaching its pinnacle in the Easter Vigil on Holy Saturday night. This week is a time of reflection for Christians to memorialize Jesus' crucifixion and to prepare their hearts, minds, and souls for his miraculous resurrection from the dead. During the sacred week, we acknowledge that the glory of Easter Sunday cannot come without the sacrifice Jesus Christ made on the cross. In his final hours on earth, Christ willingly endured excruciating pain, torture, and execution on the cross out of a deep and abiding love for all of his creation. Again, if you're just joining us, this is the statement from Trump. Through his suffering, we have redemption. Through his death, we are forgiven of our sins. Through his resurrection, we have hope of eternal life. On Easter morning, the stone is rolled away, the tomb is empty, and light prevails over darkness, signaling that death does not have the final word. This Holy Week, my administration renews its promise to defend the Christian faith in our schools, military, workplaces, hospitals, and halls of government. We will never waver in safeguarding the right to religious liberty, upholding the dignity of life, and protecting God in our public square. As we focus on Christ's redeeming sacrifice, we look to his love, humility, and obedience, even in life's most difficult and uncertain moments. This week, we pray for an outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon our beloved nation. We pray that America will remain a beacon of faith, hope, and freedom for the entire world. And we pray to achieve a future that reflects the truth, beauty, and goodness of Christ's eternal kingdom in heaven. May God bless you and your family during this special time of year, and may he continue to bless the United States of America. That is a statement on Holy Week from the President of the United States, and I think very appropriate to end today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Have a great Easter. Remember what it's all about, folks. And we will be back Monday morning with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I look forward to it already.